Fiancé suggested we open our relationship just before the wedding, only for me to discover later that his friends had been influencing him for months. I've been with Jake for 5 years, and we were just months away from our wedding, a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family. We'd already sent out the invitations, booked the venue, and finalized most of the details. Everything seemed to be falling into place. The life we'd envisioned together felt tangible, just within reach. Then, one evening, Jake blindsided me with something that shattered my sense of security. We were sitting on the couch, going over the guest list for the umpteenth time, debating whether we really needed to invite his third cousin. Jake had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, which I assumed was just pre-wedding nerves. I kept talking, trying to lighten the mood, when Jake suddenly put his notepad down and turned to face me. His expression was serious, his voice low. "There's something I've been thinking about," he began, pausing as if searching for the right words. I braced myself, expecting a conversation about the logistics of the wedding or maybe some unresolved guest drama. But then, with a deep breath, he dropped a bomb. "I think we should open our relationship." I stared at him, stunned, waiting for the punchline. But Jake's face remained earnest, sincere even. My mind couldn't fully register what he'd just said. "What?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you serious?" "Yes." Jake nodded, his discomfort evident, but his gaze steady. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I believe it could be beneficial for both of us." My head was spinning. Beneficial? Non-monogamy had never been a part of our conversations, not once in 5 years. We'd always talked about building a traditional family, committed and exclusive. I thought I knew Jake's views on relationships, and I certainly never anticipated this. "I thought we were happy," I managed to say, my voice shaking as tears threatened to spill. "Why would you even suggest this now? We're getting married in a few months, Jake." Jake's face softened, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "It's not that I'm unhappy," he insisted, "but I've been having doubts about monogamy. I've been talking to Noah and Morgan, and they've helped me see that exploring this could actually be good for us." And there it was, Noah and Morgan. I'd always been wary of Jake's 2 friends. Noah was a charismatic, self-proclaimed spiritual guide who loved to wax poetic about unconventional living, while Morgan was a free-spirited artist who openly disdained any kind of commitment. They had always preached about expanding consciousness and embracing alternative relationships. Over the years, I'd tried to tolerate their influence, participating in group meditations or discussions. But deep down, I felt that they had a strong hold over Jake, a hold that I was now seeing in its full intensity. "Noah and Morgan put you up to this, didn't they?" I demanded, my voice rising with anger. "They've always pushed these weird ideas about relationships, and now you want to try them out on me?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "It's not like that," he defended. "They didn't force me into anything. I've been feeling this way for a while, and they just helped me articulate it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jake had always been rational, grounded. How could he let Noah and Morgan's unconventional theories take root so deeply? My hands trembled with a mix of anger and hurt. "So, what is it you're actually asking for?" I demanded, struggling to keep my composure. "Do you want to see other people? Do you want me to see other people? Are you still in this relationship, or not?" Jake hesitated, clearly unprepared for my questions. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I just think, maybe we could explore this together." "Explore this?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I thought we were planning our wedding, Jake, not the logistics of dating other people." He flinched at my tone, guilt flashing across his face. "I know this is hard," he said softly. "I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't want to go into marriage with unresolved feelings." I felt tears burn in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "And you thought this was the best way to resolve them? By blindsiding me right before our weddings?" "I didn't know how else to bring it up," he said, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to be honest about where I'm at." But honesty, in this case, felt like betrayal. The man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry, was suddenly a stranger, someone who wanted things I couldn't comprehend. I stood up, needing space, needing air. "I need time to process this," I said flatly, my voice betraying my exhaustion. "I can't talk about this right now." Jake reached out, but I pulled away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, looking utterly lost. I didn't respond. I turned and walked into the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. As I collapsed onto the bed, tears finally broke free. The weight of everything hit me all at once. The broken trust, the shattered future, The realization that the man I thought I knew had been hiding a different side of himself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what Jake had said. How had we gotten here? I replayed the past months in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed, moments that hinted at this shift. But nothing made sense. Everything felt like it was falling apart, just as we were supposed to be building a life together. The next morning, Jake tried to talk to me again, but I wasn't ready. "I just need some space," I told him, my voice hoarse from crying. He nodded, looking defeated, and left the apartment for work. I spent the day in a fog, torn between the overwhelming urge to salvage our relationship and the nagging feeling that something fundamental had changed. As the day went on, one thought kept repeating in my mind. This wasn't just about exploring something new. This was about him doubting us, doubting me. And that was a realization I wasn't sure I could come back from. The next few days were filled with heavy tension and awkward silences. I was hurt, angry, and confused. How could Jake suggest something so drastic, so close to our wedding? I couldn't let it go, so I decided to dig deeper, something I'd never done in our relationship before. I needed answers, even if it meant crossing a line. One evening, while we were sitting in the living room, I mustered the courage to ask. "I want to see your phone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. It was a bold move, one that felt invasive, but the need to know the truth was stronger than my guilt. Jake looked surprised, his eyes narrowing for a moment. Then, to my surprise, he handed over his phone, albeit reluctantly. "I don't want to hide anything," he said quietly. His willingness only confused me more, but I didn't hesitate. I scrolled through his call history, my heart racing. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were countless calls with Noah and Morgan, some lasting over an hour. These calls stretched back for months, far before Jake had mentioned anything about opening our relationship. The realization felt like a punch to the gut. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. "So, you've been planning this for months?" I asked, my voice barely concealing the hurt. "Why didn't you talk to me about your doubts instead of them?" Jake's face was a mix of guilt and sadness. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how to bring it up. I was afraid you'd react exactly like this. How else was I supposed to react?" I shot back, unable to contain my anger. "You blindsided me with this, Jake. You didn't even give me a chance to understand." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I should have talked to you, but I felt trapped. Noah and Morgan just seemed easier to talk to about this stuff." The admission only deepened the wound. It wasn't just the idea of opening our relationship that hurt. It was the fact that Jake had confided in his friends instead of me. He had kept me out of his doubts, making me feel like an outsider in my own relationship. After a long, painful silence, Jake spoke up again. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice filled with regret. "That's why I think we should try couples counseling." His suggestion surprised me, but I knew it was the only way to have a real chance at healing. "Fine," I said reluctantly, "but I'm not sure it will fix everything." "I understand," Jake said softly, "but I'm willing to try if you are." I nodded, still unsure but unwilling to give up completely. I still loved him, despite everything, but I also knew that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Trust had been shattered, and I wasn't sure if therapy could really repair it. We scheduled our first couples counseling session for the following week. I hoped it would be a turning point, a chance to unpack the chaos, find answers, and maybe start to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Despite everything, I wanted to believe that we could still make it work. I clung to that hope, desperate to save what we had. But the next morning, everything changed. I woke up to an empty bed. At first, I assumed Jake had gone out for an early run or a coffee run, but something about the stillness felt wrong. I grabbed my phone and noticed a new message from Jake. My stomach tightened as I opened it, and my heart dropped. "I need some space to think." That was all it said. For words, delivered coldly, without any explanation. I felt a rush of panic, like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I tried calling him immediately, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I texted him, my fingers trembling as I typed. "What's going on? Where are you? Please talk to me." But there was no response. I walked through our apartment, the reality of his absence sinking in. The wedding invitations were still sitting on the kitchen counter, untouched, waiting to be mailed out. His half-packed suitcase was lying open in the corner of the bedroom, clothes hastily thrown inside, as if he'd left in a hurry. The sight of it made me feel sick. I sank onto the edge of the bed, a wave of emotions washing over me. Anger, confusion, heartbreak. It was like the man I loved had simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. We had talked about therapy, about working through things together, and now he was gone without a word of explanation. It felt like a cruel joke, as if the promise of trying to fix things had been ripped away before it even began. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could Jake just leave like that? I had agreed to counseling in good faith, hoping we could salvage what was left. Now, it felt like I'd been played, as if he'd never really intended to go through with it. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, alternating between tears and angry pacing. I tried calling a few more times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Please, Jake. I need to understand what's happening. Just tell me where you are. But the silence on the other end was deafening. By nightfall, I was emotionally exhausted. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the engagement ring on my finger. It suddenly felt foreign, like a promise that no longer held any meaning. I slipped it off and placed it on the coffee table, feeling a pang of guilt as I did. It was as if removing it marked a finality I wasn't ready to accept. I called my best friend, Lily, hoping for some semblance of comfort. Jake's gone, I blurted out as soon as she answered, my voice shaky. What do you mean, gone? She asked, clearly taken aback. I explained everything. How I'd woken up to his cold message, the unanswered calls, the half-packed suitcase. Lily's voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. What the hell is wrong with him? She exclaimed. He can't just leave like that. You deserve better. Her words offered a small amount of solace, but they didn't change the reality of the situation. Jake was gone, and I had no idea if or when he would come back. As the days passed, I tried to distract myself with work and mundane tasks, but the emptiness in the apartment was overwhelming. Every corner held a memory, our lazy mornings on the couch, the shared laughter over takeout dinners, the plans we'd made for the future. Now, those memories felt like cruel reminders of a relationship that might be beyond saving. A week later, still with no word from Jake, I received a call from Dr. Ross's office, confirming our upcoming therapy appointment. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to cancel or keep it. Part of me wanted to give up, to accept that Jake had made his choice. But another part of me, the part that still loved him despite everything, couldn't let go so easily. So, I kept the appointment. If Jake ever came back, I needed to be prepared. I needed answers, closure, something to help me understand why everything had fallen apart so suddenly. In the meantime, I tried to focus on taking care of myself. I reached out to friends more often, went for long walks to clear my head, and tried to make sense of the mess Jake had left behind. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when I broke down, the tears coming in waves that I couldn't control. But I knew I had to find a way forward, with or without him. And deep down, as much as I hated to admit it, I knew this might be the end. The days dragged on in a blur of unanswered questions and fading hope. Jake's sudden departure left a gaping void, and each passing day, without contact, deepened my sense of abandonment. The surrealness of the situation made it feel like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept replaying our last conversations in my head, searching for something, anything, that might have signaled he was planning to leave. But there was nothing that prepared me for the cold, detached message he'd sent before vanishing. I confided in my closest friends, hoping to make sense of it all. Lily, my best friend, was furious on my behalf. She was the one who had seen Jake and me through every milestone of our relationship. Now, she was determined to see me through this one too. He left you just like that? She asked incredulously during one of our late-night phone calls. Yes, I admit it, the rawness of the truth hitting me again. He didn't even try to explain. You need to focus on yourself now, Lily insisted. You don't owe him anything, especially after this. He's the one who walked away. Her words were meant to empower me, but they only highlighted my own conflicting emotions. It wasn't that simple. I still loved Jake, and no matter how hurt I was, part of me wanted to understand what had driven him to this point. Was this truly about his doubts about monogamy, or had Noah and Morgan played a bigger role than Jake was willing to admit? I wrestled with the possibility that Jake had been manipulated into believing this was the only path forward. But I couldn't deny the reality of the situation. Jake had chosen to leave. I was left alone, standing at a crossroads. The ring I had taken off still sat on the coffee table, a symbol of a commitment that now felt hollow. I knew I had to make a decision, but I felt paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong one. One evening, after another day of waiting and wondering, I decided to go for a walk. The crisp air felt refreshing against my skin, and I hoped it might clear my mind. As I wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, my phone buzzed. For a fleeting moment, my heart leapt. It could be Jake. But when I glanced at the screen, I saw it was Dr. Ross, the couple's therapist we'd planned to see. I answered hesitantly. "Hello. Hi, this is Dr. Ross," she said warmly. "I know we had a session scheduled, and I wanted to check if you'd still like to attend, even if it's just you. Sometimes, individual sessions can help process what's happening in a relationship." I paused, unsure of what to say. Going alone felt like admitting defeat, but maybe it was exactly what I needed. "Yes," I finally said, surprising myself. "I'd like to come in." 2 days later, I found myself sitting alone in Dr. Ross's office. The familiar sense of anxiety returned as she asked me to share how I was feeling. "I'm lost," I confessed, tears welling up in my eyes. "I don't know if I should keep hoping or if I should just let go." Dr. Ross listened attentively before responding. "It's natural to feel torn when you still love someone who's hurt you," she said gently. "But sometimes, love isn't enough if the foundation has been damaged." Her words were both comforting and painful. The love I had for Jake was real, but so was the betrayal. I keep wondering if this was really about his doubts or if his friends influenced him more than he realized, I admitted. "That's a possibility," Dr. Ross acknowledged. "But the key question is, what do you want, regardless of what drove Jake to this point?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. What did I want? Did I still want a future with Jake, even after everything he'd done? Or was I holding on to an idea of him that no longer existed? I left the session feeling emotionally drained, but clearer than I'd felt in days. I realized that the idea of therapy hadn't been just about fixing our relationship. It was about finding closure for myself, whether or not Jake returned. I needed to prioritize my own healing, even if that meant facing the painful possibility that Jake might never come back. When I got home, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ring still sitting on the coffee table. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a reminder of the life we'd planned, a life that now felt uncertain. I picked it up and held it for a moment, feeling its weight. I wasn't ready to put it back on, but I wasn't ready to let it go either. I placed it gently in my bedside drawer, a decision for another day. The following week, I received a text from Jake, his first contact since he'd left. "I'm sorry for disappearing. I needed time to figure things out. Can we talk soon?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me felt a rush of relief. He hadn't completely abandoned me. But another part of me felt a surge of anger. Was this too little, too late? Lily's words echoed in my mind. "You don't owe him anything." She was right. I needed to focus on what was best for me, not just on preserving a relationship that had caused so much pain. As I typed out my reply, I felt a sense of resolve. "We can talk, but I need to be honest about how much you've hurt me." I hit send, knowing that this conversation could go in any direction, toward reconciliation, toward closure, or toward a final goodbye. For the first time since Jake had left, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was no longer just waiting for his next move. I was making my own. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it on my terms. The realization that I needed to focus on my own well-being hit me hard, like a wave of clarity breaking through the fog. I had spent weeks clinging to the hope that Jake would return with answers and remorse, that we could somehow salvage the life we'd planned together. But now, the uncertainty and heartbreak had become unbearable. I was tired of waiting, tired of trying to decode his actions, and tired of feeling like I was losing myself in the process. The thought of cutting ties with Jake was painful. It was a love that had shaped my life for 5 years, one that I had imagined growing old with. But the reality of staying in this limbo was even worse. It wasn't just about whether or not Jake would come back. It was about whether I could continue being in a relationship where my needs had been dismissed, my trust had been betrayed, and my heart had been broken repeatedly. I took a deep breath and opened my phone, pulling up Jake's contact. With a mixture of determination and sadness, I blocked his number, along with Noah's and Morgan's. It wasn't an act of anger, but of survival. I needed space, real, uninterrupted space to think clearly, to reflect on what I truly wanted, and to find some semblance of peace. Lily was the first to notice my shift. "Did something happen?" she asked when I told her about blocking Jake. "I just need space," I admitted. "I can't keep letting him or his friends cloud my thoughts. I need to figure out who I am outside of all this." She nodded, her voice filled with support. That's the best thing you can do for yourself right now. You deserve to find your own happiness without all this chaos. Her words resonated deeply. For so long, I had been caught up in trying to fix what was broken, whether it was Jake's doubts, the influence of his friends, or my own shattered sense of trust. But now I realized that the only thing I could truly fix was myself. The days that followed were filled with moments of both relief and crushing sadness. There were mornings when I felt a strange sense of freedom, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But there were also nights when the loneliness was overwhelming, when the silence of the apartment reminded me of everything I had lost. One evening, I took a long, solitary walk by the river near our old favorite spot. It was a place where Jake and I had once shared dreams of our future, where we'd laughed, kissed, and made promises that now seemed so distant. I stood by the water, the memories washing over me, and allowed myself to grieve fully for the first time. I wasn't just mourning the relationship. I was mourning the person I had been with Jake, the version of me that believed love could conquer anything, even a broken heart. I knew I would never be the same, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe, in some strange way, this painful chapter was also a chance to rediscover who I was and who I wanted to be. I continued seeing Dr. Ross for individual therapy, and each session helped me unpack the layers of hurt, confusion, and self-doubt. "You're taking an important step by setting boundaries," she told me during one session. "But remember, healing isn't linear. There will be days when you feel strong and days when the pain returns. Both are part of the process." Her words were comforting, a reminder that I didn't have to have it all figured out. The pressure to make the right decision was overwhelming, but I realized that the only right decision was the one that honored my own needs. One morning, I found myself writing in my journal, a habit I hadn't kept up with in months. I wrote about everything: the love I still had for Jake, the resentment toward Noah and Morgan, the moments of hope that were quickly replaced by despair. And then, I wrote about what I wanted for myself: peace, stability, a love that felt certain. It was the first time I'd put my own desires into words, and it felt liberating. I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more difficult conversations, more tears, and more moments of self-doubt. But for the first time, I felt a small spark of empowerment. I deserved a love that was unwavering, a partner who didn't need space to know they wanted to be with me. As the weeks went by, the silence from Jake continued. I wondered if he was truly taking time to reflect, or if he was simply moving on without me. The uncertainty still hurt, but it was a pain I was learning to live with. It wasn't as sharp as before, and the constant ache had started to dull. Lily suggested a weekend trip to clear my head, a short getaway to a quiet cabin in the woods. "It might help you reset," she said. "Get away from all the reminders for a bit." I agreed, and the trip turned out to be exactly what I needed. Surrounded by nature and the simplicity of a cozy fire, I felt a sense of calm that had been missing for months. I hiked, read books, and wrote more in my journal, each word a step toward reclaiming myself. One night, as I sat by the fire alone, I thought about Jake again. The memories were still there, but they felt different, less like wounds and more like lessons. I realized that, regardless of what happened next, I couldn't wait for someone else's certainty to validate my own worth. I had to believe that I deserved a love that wouldn't waver. As I packed up to leave the cabin, I knew I was far from having all the answers. But I felt more ready than ever to face the next chapter, whatever it might be. Whether it meant moving on without Jake or giving him one more chance, I knew it had to be on my terms. And as terrifying as it was, the possibility of letting go was starting to feel less like an end and more like a beginning, a chance to put myself first for the first time in a long time.